One young teen in Ohio would return to his family home on the day of Halloween. And while nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first, his afternoon would slowly progress into the worst kind of nightmare imaginable. My name is Adrian, and welcome back to Coffee House Crime, and happy Halloween to all of you, and I can assure you there are no tricks or treats to this one. In today's case, we'll be looking into the lives and the struggles of the Lisk family, and how their world would be frighteningly torn apart on the 31st of October 2010. So grab a coffee, pull up a seat, and get cozy, my friend. This is the case of the Lisk family. Today's video is sponsored by Shudder. Shudder, which is brought to you by AMC Networks, offers an unbeatable selection of horror, supernatural, and thrillers, with exclusive original titles that you won't find anywhere else. You can stream hundreds of spooky titles across multiple devices, and new content is being added to the platform every week. Who needs caffeine when you have a Shudder subscription? Their Shudder original, Host, kept me on the edge of my seat all the way through, and I never thought that I'd see a horror film based around a Zoom meeting. And if you prefer things a little more light-hearted, a personal favourite of mine to watch was One Cut of the Dead. Think Shaun of the Dead, but with its own very special twist. Shudder is also celebrating its 61 days of Halloween, and with Halloween here and in full spirit, there is no better time to try Shudder out. You get full access to their catalogue for $5.99 a month, or $56.99 a year. And if you visit Shudder.com and use the promotional code CoffeeHouseCrime, you will get your first 30 days for free, and you may cancel anytime you like. Get started with streaming the best horror, thriller, and supernatural content. Shudder's expertly curated collection includes many must-see titles, plus all the best horror documentaries and the hit Creepshow TV series from executive producer Greg Nicotero of The Walking Dead. If you're interested, that's Shudder.com and use the promotional code CoffeeHouseCrime. And thank you, Shudder, for sponsoring today's video. Our story today takes us to the Buckeye State of Ohio, and more specifically, North Ohio. It borders on to one of America's largest lakes, adequately named for today's case, Lake Erie. A lake that is so massive, its shores span across 4 US states and Canada. North Ohio is famous for many things, and despite severe weather being fairly common here, most of its alluring features include the outdoors. With beautiful lakes, open plains, and lush national parks, it's the perfect place for any outdoors person looking for a getaway. And you can also find Cedar Point to the north, the second largest amusement park in the US. This, coupled with Lake Erie's holiday-esque atmosphere, makes Northern Ohio a great getaway for families. And a quick question, but why are you folks obsessed with giant baskets? Unfortunately, in today's case, we won't be going to any amusement parks, or doing anything leisurely for that matter, as we head northwest into the sticks of Northern Ohio. Residing on the long, sparsely populated road of Route 2 in Martin, we find the household of the Lisk family. And here lived William Billy Lisk and his wife Susan Lisk, along with their 3 sons. Both Devin and Derek Griffin were the children of Susan and her previous marriage, and child number 3 was William Lisk Jr., who was also from Billy's previous marriage. William, who was not so affectionately named BJ, no longer lived with the rest of the family under troubling circumstances, which we will get to very soon. The family had a relatively happy existence. They were religious country folk, the boys growing up and going to church every Sunday and singing in the church choir. One of the family's favourite pastimes, especially for Billy and his sons, was hunting. And the house in which they lived in wasn't so bad either. It was sat on 100 acres of land, and the Lisk family would often use every inch of it for walking, hunting, and fishing. Now, you may or may not have heard of the saying, every family has its secrets. And for the Lisks, that was no different. Although at a glance life seemed to be pretty pleasant, there was a much more sinister issue lurking in the background. And this is where we turn our focus to Billy Lisk and his son, William. Throughout William's childhood, he would grow up as a very angry kid. He would often bully other children and cause fights and problems wherever he played. His parents took this as William just being a naughty child. He'll grow out of it, right? But moving into his teenage years, those doubts perpetuated. He would continue getting in trouble in school, and eventually with the law too. When William was 15 years of age, his father Billy would finally meet Susan. Billy worked at a waste management firm nearby, and Susan was an office manager of the same company. The two would eventually hit it off, getting married not much later in 2001. And although they had happily found love, their marriage would infuriate William. In fact, he had a certain disdain for his stepmother. He hated her encroaching his home, and he hated her rules. The following year, a distressing call to law enforcement would be made by Billy over his son William, after he had threatened to harm himself. And this would mark the very beginning of a drastic decline in William's mental health and behavioural issues. He started to become more reckless, his anger more turbulent, and his actions more daring. Things would spiral so far that in 2004, after yet another argument with his stepmother, the 17-year-old William would strike her hard in the chest, this resulting in William being charged with a felonious assault. William disliked his stepmother, this was no secret, and she was scared of him too. His violent outbursts and incessant lack of respect was very worrying. In fact, just 2 months after striking Susan in the chest, William would get into another argument with his stepmother, in which he bashed her with a coffee mug before stealing her car. Susan pressed charges against William, but it was to no avail. Upon a mental health assessment, William would be deemed unfit for trial and would be diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. This would eventually result in William being removed from the house by his father and placed into a group home for mental health patients in Sandusky, by the shore of Lake Erie. And although William was now receiving the treatments he so sorely needed, he would continue to be a danger to those around him, being involved with the law 3 times during a stay in the group house, one of those instances being an all-out brawl between William and Billy. When William returned to the household after his treatment, things did not get better, and William was still on a warpath. But the straw that broke the camel's back would fall in the autumn of 2004, when William was only 18 years old. It was early one morning, while Susan was taking a shower, that William entered the bathroom and attempted to attack her in one of her most vulnerable states. And while Susan did manage to fend her stepson off, it left her traumatized. She now felt even less safe in her own home, and the event would also send Billy into an understandable rage against his son. By that very same evening, William was out on the streets, having been kicked out of the Lisk household by his father. And since William was no longer a minor, he would have to fend for himself from here on out. It was at this stage that William started growing even further apart from his family. And although he would live close by enough to visit them on occasions, arguments would still ensue. William's brothers and his stepmother didn't enjoy their time with him, and William was aware of that too. A few years would pass with this dynamic. All in the meanwhile, William was still being treated for a schizoaffective disorder. But treatment was intermittent, and often without full discipline. And one day, his therapist would deem him a danger to himself and others. William would eventually be hospitalized in the year of 2007, in order to be kept under surveillance for proper treatment of a schizoaffective disorder. And despite all of his grievances, Billy would still never give up on William. In fact, in order to get William out of hospital, Billy would apply for guardianship for his now adult son. His guardianship application stated, "Mr. Lisk wants to protect William and to get him the help that he needs. He would eventually like to see him in a halfway house or a group home. When William is on his medication, he does really good. After a while, he will stop taking it because he thinks he's okay. Starts drinking and smokes pot." So soon after this would become the family setup for the foreseeable future. William would officially stay at a halfway house, but he often visited his father at his father's home. The dynamic of the family was a very turbulent one, but it did keep William out of hospitalization, and so all family members just put up with it. But William would make his family and those around him extremely uncomfortable. And, even worse, neighbours around the family would one by one lose a family pet, often suspecting William of torturing and killing both local domestic animals and wildlife. And, psychologically speaking, this was a huge red flag over William's head. After all, some killers do tend to start with animals. In an effort to reduce his encounters with Susan and neighbours, Billy would often take his son William on long weekends to the family cabin, located in Carroll County, just a few hours southeast from their home back in North Ohio. And while the two were there, they would hunt deer and talk about William's struggles. But these trips would only temporarily distract William from the other half of his family that he disliked so much, and his mental health wasn't getting any better either. It was quite the opposite. It was actually getting worse. And while his behaviour was being kept in line, it wasn't necessarily being tamed. A realisation that, tragically, would come all too late. We're moving forward, and the date is now the 31st of October 2010. Halloween. Autumn's days were now beginning to get cold. It was 44 degrees Fahrenheit or 7 degrees Celsius that day, and the rest of Ohio had trick-or-treats on their mind. It was around 9:30 in the morning that the 16-year-old Devin Griffin, who was stepbrother to William, returned back to the family home. He had stayed the night at his biological father's house. Devin entered the Lisk household before proceeding to his room to get changed. Despite Halloween, it was still a Sunday, so he was due to be singing in the choir for his church's Sunday service. Devin changed his clothes before heading back downstairs towards the front door, and that is when he accidentally bumped into William, which was kind of odd because William was not normally left alone in the house. Nevertheless, he noticed that the sofa had a made-up bed. The two briefly spoke before William asked Devin where he was going, and how long he thought he would be, and how he was getting there. And this was very uncharacteristic for William. He was often described as gloomy and slow. So why was he so talkative all of a sudden? And why did he seem happy? William almost always kept to himself, and Devin and William often did not see eye to eye. But Devin brushed it off, gave William his answers, and carried on with his Sunday service. This week's Sunday service was not a short one. And after performing in the choir, Devin headed home, not returning until the early afternoon. The house was quiet, and William didn't seem to be around any longer either. But maybe everyone was just busy with their own Sunday plans. And so, much like his usual schedule, Devin headed straight upstairs to his bedroom to play video games. A few hours would pass, and as daylight escaped, Devin removed his headset and made his way downstairs to the kitchen for a drink. This was when, amid the darkness, he realised that the house was still dead quiet. Out of confusion, Devin made his way to check for his parents in their bedroom. He opened the door to see that they were still in bed. His mother's foot poking out of the bottom of their maroon comforter, the duvet pulled over their heads. Devin walked up to the side of his mother's bed before calling her name and giving her a poke. But there was no response from her. He turned his attention to the top of the duvet before pulling it down slowly, and as he did, that's when he saw a lot of red. His mother's pillow seemed to be covered in what appeared to be blood. Surely this was a joke. After all, it was Halloween, and his family were well known for getting into the spirit of things. But it wasn't until the scene came into focus for Devin that he could fully grasp what he was seeing. This was no prank. His mother wasn't moving, and the blood on her pillow was very real. The smell of copper came into play, as would the finer details of his mother's corpse. Devin screamed, sprinting out of the bedroom and out of the house, without looking for his brother Derek or his stepbrother William. In his panicked state, Devon called his Aunt Laurie and tried to explain to her what he had just found. Laurie responded by calling 911, before rushing over to the Lisk household to comfort her distraught nephew.
We need an ambulance and the sheriff to show up, please. Where's the blood? It's on the bed. In their house? In their bed? She said it's in their bed. Okay. Oh my God! Lori? I don't know. Bill's in the bed. He's dead. He's got to be dead. Okay. Did it look like maybe he was shot? Oh, he's either shot or stabbed or something.
And as authorities arrived, they were faced with a very gruesome scene. Pulling back the covers in the master bedroom, they would reveal the bodies of Susan and Billy Lisk. Billy had been shot 5 times in the face, still lying in the position that he had fallen asleep in the night before. And Susan had been shot 3 times in the head, but, unlike Billy, she was found sprawled under the covers, as if she had been moved. Forensics would find that she had been assaulted after her death. Upon further exploration of the house, police were halted by a locked door. A locked door that, when eventually opened, led to Derek Griffin's bedroom. And there they would find Derek, still curled up in his bed in a fetal position. He too had been murdered, suffering blunt force trauma to the head. Within the house, authorities would find a bloody claw hammer which matched the wounds and injuries sustained by Derek. It had been determined that, one by one, the family had been killed while they were sleeping peacefully in their beds. First Derek, and then his father, and finally Susan. Muddy footprints were found around the house which led to a pond in the back garden. At first, police suspected the gun used to kill Susan and Billy could have been disposed of in that pond, but once it was drained, they found nothing. And neighbours, who were interviewed by police, would reveal that they had heard what they thought to be gunshots at around 6:30 on the morning of Halloween. But with this being a rural area, they thought nothing of it. Terrifyingly, these reports suggested that when Devon returned back to the house that morning before going to choir, his family had already been murdered. Their lifeless bodies just on the other side of his bedroom wall while he changed and left for church. And even worse, they were still there when he returned later that day, playing video games, deafened by a headset, in a dark house. The events that unfolded on Halloween of 2010 left a lot for the devastated Devon and Laurie to process. But it also raised one alarming question. Where was William? Devon had already spoken to him in the house that morning, a time frame which was believed to be after his family were killed. And the suspicion continued to grow. In fact, on her initial 911 call to police, Laurie had already highlighted William's name, stating,
His son DJ was here last night. They were going to go hunting. They've had a lot of trouble with him, with the law. And he's threatened Susie before.
Laurie would also tell police officers that the family vehicle, a Ford F-150, was missing from the property. And therefore, with a missing brother, a missing car, and a troubled history, William became the police's primary suspect. And it wouldn't take police long to find him either. He was actually back at the family cabin 170 miles away in Carroll County, where he had been on vacation with his father not even 48 hours prior. And on his way, surveillance footage captured him at a Subway grabbing a sandwich. He was finally found on the porch of his cabin by Carroll County deputies, with a cigarette in his mouth, his sandwich not yet eaten into. William was initially charged with only 1 count of murder, and this was so that the county could hold him until he could be seen by a jury. And the following month, in November of 2010, that day would finally come, where he was charged with not 3, but 6 counts of aggravated murder, where he would plead not guilty to all charges. William was then held in Ottawa County Jail with a bond set for $3 million until a second trial could be held. And with the state of Ohio accepting capital punishment, William knew that the death penalty was an all too real possibility. And so, not surprisingly, William changed his plea to guilty in his pre-trial hearing, accepting his guilt to 3 counts of aggravated murder in exchange that the death penalty would be removed from his possible sentences. William was eventually found guilty and sentenced to 3 life sentences in prison without the possibility of parole. At his sentencing, William would apologise for killing his family members, blaming his mental illness and even Satan for his actions. He was soon after shipped off to Ross Correctional Institution in Chillicothe to live out the rest of his life behind bars. However, it would seem that the death penalty had eventually found William, because in March of 2015, at the young age of 29, William was found dead in his cell from a self-inflicted wound. It seemed as if the last life that he would take would ultimately be his own. Usually, homicide cases that involve mental health disorders will also highlight a story that lacks proper treatment or regulation of medication. And this story, it's no different. It's evident that William had trouble keeping discipline with his medication, despite those around him seeking help for his regressing mental health. Billy cared for William deeply, and he never gave up on him either. He even sought treatment for his son wherever he could, and he even tried to mediate the family around him. But unfortunately, this father's love would be in vain, and ultimately his life would end by the hands of his very own son. A dark and twisted side note to this case, but the very next morning after the Lisk family murders, Billy Lisk's sister, Sue Dunmeyer, would tragically die in an accidental fire inside her own garage. And while the incident was accidental, it left Billy's mother with the news of 2 of her children each dying in their own separate ways, less than 24 hours apart, which is a horrible coincidence to deal with. I feel sorry for all of those involved, mostly for Devon, who had to witness the corpse of his own mother and stepfather, and the thought of him being all alone in a house full of dead people on Halloween, that gives me the shudders. However, I do hope that all of you have a lovely Halloween tonight, and if you're watching this in the future, then I wish you a happy Halloween the next time it creeps around. Anyway, I'm off to scare myself with a few hours on Shudder, and if you're looking for anything to watch tonight, then my link is down below. Thank you again for watching, folks, and I'll be back again in a week's time for another video. Until that moment arrives though, look after each other. Goodbye.